So there's a misconception that if you're single, you are incomplete, perhaps damaged, salvaged, and you won't be happy until you find your one. And that is not true. That is bullshit. It is a message that has been fed to us by media and advertising. The truth is, when you're single, you have the richest soil for growth. That's why I created this podcast. And unlike other podcasts, this one is host-driven, not guest-driven. That means I will be rotating health and wellness experts 3 times a week to give you the giant box of wellness crayons, not just the primary colors, so you can start building a meaningful life. It's time to give singlehood a cape. So today's host, Lindsay Burke, she and I go way back when I was working in addiction, residential, Malibu, driving my little motorcycle on PCH to help people with addiction, and she was on my team. I'm so happy that she is a part of this rotating hosts and experts for this podcast. Lindsay Burke is the founder of Lift Therapy, and she's a licensed therapist, behavior interventionist, coach, martial artist, yes, martial artist, a wife, a parent, and expert consultant on attachment, narcissism, and toxic relationships, as well as early childhood development. Yes, she does everything. And she believes that human connection is the best medicine and is committed to helping people heal by helping them develop healthy attachments with others. Her mission is to enhance the field of mental health by making support and resources more accessible to you in the form of psychoeducation, supportive programming, and individual therapy. Lindsay has served as a host for the Disney Plus show Reconnect and as an advisor and expert writer for various newspapers, podcasts, and radio shows such as the Chicago Tribune, Relation Up, P Therapy, Life and Style Magazine, Pop Sugar, and on and on and on. She is very talented. She's a powerful catalyst, and I hope you enjoy. Well, I know you're going to enjoy and get so much out of her episode today.
Hey all, Lindsay Burke here, and today I have Candace St. John with us. I am so excited to have her on our episode today. She is an epidemiologist and a public health specialist with additional training in pediatric sleep and lactation support. She's a researcher and a mom who helps parents cut through the noise and encourages parents to really use evidence-based empirical studies, aka science, when they are trying to make informed decisions on their parenting, and in combination with their own intuition to inform their parenting decisions. And so, thank you, Candace, so much for being on our show today.
Oh my gosh, of course. Thank you for having me. It's I'm always honored when people think to invite me to chat. And I love talking about all of these parenting topics because I think there's such a disconnect between what the data say, some nuance from people who understand how to, interpret the data, and, parents, getting the information. So yeah,
with
happy
Google.
to chat.
I mean, years ago, there were like a few select books that were out there that people could refer to that were really kind of the main sources of information. Now I feel like parents are almost overwhelmed with information.
Yes.
And then there's a lot of money and a lot of misinformation out there that can easily be adopted. It sounds good, but it's really not based in science. And so I'm just so grateful for the work that you do, because you help people tease that out and really look at who's studying, and really, really researching and using scientific methods and understanding deeper rooted issues to inform parents on how to make their decisions. And as a mom, especially when your heart's in it and you know this impacts you. I've shared with you before, and we'll share again, that there are so many things that I was a part of, where I'm realizing in hindsight, I was a part of the problem because I was buying into a lot of this information without doing my own research. And then as I started to become more informed, I thought, I've been telling parents these things all these years. So I'm just so grateful for you being here. But first of all, let's clarify, because this is a big word. For those of you who are new to this term, what is an epidemiologist? What does that even mean? What do you do?
So epidemiology, if I'm sure some of you have heard of it since there's been a whole pandemic going on, or a couple now. But basically, it's just this it's the study of diseases at its most basic term, or term, form.
Sure. Yeah.
It's basically, epidemiologists are people who study a population. We want to know what the burden of disease is and what the effects are, right? So what I did, so currently, right now, I'm not even going to diminish it. I'm rocking the stay-at-home mom role right now. It's not without also, doing other things, because I can't just be one thing, of course. I have to just keep, I just sat for my.
You can't take the therapist out of the mom. You can't take the therapist out of me. Like, it's in there. It's ingrained now and everything. I always say that about martial arts. I'm forever a martial artist in my heart, my mind, my meanness.
Hey, it's not meanness.
You'll lose the epidemiologist in you. You can't unthink once you know certain things. You can't unthink.
Right. Yes.
In that kind of way.
So that's what I did for 5.5 years before I'll be frank, I got a little teeny tiny bit burnt out, juggling I was still a full-time stay-at-home mom, but also full-time worker because, as a lot of us experienced the pandemic craziness, because I have a June 2020 baby. So what I did was I was in a rural New Hampshire hospital. I had a million hats that I wore. I was a team of one. So I worked with the hospital, tracking some of the chronic disease burdens that we had in our community. Obviously, I was a part of the pandemic response for COVID-19. I had to develop the tracking systems. Very pregnant. But I also was really deeply involved in community health initiatives. That was like the actual department I worked under. And I, helped co-create programs in the community with different organizations. We had formal data collection evaluation plans. I also helped to provide best practice community health improvement strategies to our community members as well as New Hampshire at large. So it was a really interesting role, but as you can see, it got a little chaotic once a baby came into the mix when I didn't have access to childcare at the time. And I also will be 100% frank, I was struggling very much so with postpartum depression and anxiety, and it really lingered. I couldn't actually recover from it until after I left my job. So I was suffering and struggling for about 2 years, which is hard to really face. But coupled with I had that on top of.
I think that's we don't talk about it enough. I did, and I think I had all the tools. I was prepared for it. I knew a lot about it. I'd worked with other women, but then you can't address it. I appreciate you sharing that because
it's hard to do it. You can't do it alone, right? Like parenting, you can't do alone. You can't just necessarily get over something, right? It's not something to just get over. It's we're encumbered with systemic issues that create or exacerbate these problems that many of us are facing.
It's already physiological. It's already so physiological. And then if you don't have the support and the tools and the resources and the things to feed you to help you recover, and then already having so much being pulled from you, and I can't even imagine working full-time job with a new baby.
So that's what I did. And I loved it. I really did. It took me a while to be at peace with the decision to step away from the workforce for a little bit, but I'm hoping that when I'm ready, I can hop back in more. I feel pretty recharged already, and hopefully we can get some more childcare soon, because I do have great things that I'm hoping to help out with in the field of public health and parenting, as we'll kind of chat about today, because I'm really passionate about
really pushed you towards this passion of recognizing this is a problem around, what we're talking about today, which is more about the parenting and about the early stages of development and the relationship between the mom and that postnatal period. Was it your personal experience that was kind of your first hands-on kind of being touched by that problem or epidemic, or however you would describe it?
I'd say yes, and because something I've been on a couple of podcasts, and I'm pretty and even on my my small Instagram following page, I am pretty frank and open about my own childhood experiences and how they shaped me as a person. So I'm not unfamiliar with at least the negative sides of parenting. And that's something that I think that's why I gravitated toward a helper field. In my undergrad experience, I went to school for psychology. And then after a couple of years working, I decided to get my master's in public health and other helper type field, right? Because I believe that we can make big changes, on a big scale and help many people avoid some of the hardships that I experienced. And I will say that after becoming a parent, it was more in my face than ever before, or probably since I was a child, because wow, like having to manage the triggers. It's not just reflecting on experiences that you have had. It's literally facing them when your child is having a really challenging behavior, and it brings you back to your literal, your physiological coding, if you will, because even when you were pre-verbal, you were getting a lot of messages from your own parenting experiences. And it might be hard for us to even understand why it is we're so angry with, or whatever it might be, upset, sad, shamed, whatever whatever the emotion is that comes up. Yeah.
By becoming a parent.
Yeah. So I know for me, it was the crying at first. I couldn't understand why it was like so much for me. And of course, everybody is supposed to have a reaction to your child crying. That's what we are, biologically, physiologically, once you become a parent, regardless if you're the birthing parent or not, you have changes. You go through substantial changes, and your brain chemistry changes to be able to attune to your child. And I think that it can be absolutely heightened and intensive, in this not necessarily a good way sometimes when you had negative or adverse childhood experiences yourself. So that's why I really became much more interested, even though I had been doing some work in that in my previous role as an epidemiologist. So yeah.
I relate to that so much. And I think a lot of parents do. We get triggered by partners or by friendships or by employers, or, we have these experiences. And then when you have a child and you're in it, and it's like its own petri dish of this, it can be managed, or it can get out of control. And so, it's just, there's something that gets amplified. I feel like that's an understatement. I wish there was a word that described how amplified whatever trauma you have, and how that just becomes so powerful if it's not addressed once you become a parent. So so that really kind of moved you into this mindset of wanting to focus a little bit in your Instagram, and a lot of the teachings that you do are around these early stages because of how big of a deal you found that it was.
Absolutely. So what really propelled me into this space was, that plus, I had been managing for the first couple of months. I knew it was tough. And I did notice I had some triggers, but I was managing okay. But it wasn't until somebody mentioned, why don't you put your baby down? Why don't you put him down? Why are you always holding him when he's sleeping? And I started getting anxious because I had work coming up, and I knew at that point, like I was going to be in it. Like I was not going to be getting help. It was August of 2020 when I was going to go back to work upstairs in my office / my child's bedroom. That's when I started getting sucked into like the whole sleep training stuff, because I was getting great advice from folks that I trusted, from, colleagues, coworkers, friends, saying this is what they did. So and I respect them, and I still do. And, this is what, people pass on and tell people to do. So that's when I started to get extra triggered. Like because then I was like, what the hell is going on here? My kid sucks. I literally was thinking that. I was like, my kid is broken. He doesn't do what everyone's saying he's supposed to do. I'm trying everything. I bought the programs that are saying like, do this, that, and the other. I get to the troubleshooting part and they're like, well, you're just not trying hard enough. And I was like, this can't be right. So I started to look into the research. Like, I was like, what are the freaking sources of this crap? Like, what is this? Because when you go online, one thing that you'll notice is there's not a lot of citations. Even if you go to like health center like web pages where you're supposed to be acquiring, like, oh, this is reliable information because it's, I'm just saying a random system, but like Mayo Clinic, right? Like we all know that's like a health system you can trust. And then you look and there's not even citations. So it's just almost like folklore being passed down from generation to generation, to be quite frank. And I hate to say it like that, but
I'm so grateful you are saying that, because that's what my experience was too.
Yeah. So I started to say, what the hell? What? Why? So then I began looking at research myself, and I did stumble upon other folks like Lindsay Hookway, and there's Greer. I cannot remember her Kirschbaum. Anyway, there's a couple of individuals, and Hey Sleepy Baby online. And I was like, wow, there are people that are starting to look at things differently and start to question, why do we do the things that we do? And when I looked at the data and the research, like, there weren't a lot of things to really solidly support the way in which we nurture our children at night or during sleep times. And then you look at the data and research regarding sleep itself, and it didn't really all add up to me. I'm like, okay, so we have this information about child development. We know that their very, very immature nervous systems do not have the capacity, like honestly, even the autonomic nervous system for babies is regulated by us, like just being close to us, never mind, the oh my gosh, what's the other? There's the autonomic
functioning, their ability to all of these things that play into being able to manage their emotions and to regulate their sleep, and to be able to regulate
like our central nervous system and the parasympathetic, the sympathetic. So, and you're looking and you're like, okay, you need the parasympathetic nervous system to be able to sleep, rest, digest, right? We don't want to be in fight, flight, or, freeze, fawn, whatever. Why, we know that children, especially, babies under 12 months old, like require co-regulation. We even know kids under like 5 need co-regulation in order to help them manage their emotions. They don't know how. They don't have higher level executive functioning to be able to say, oh, this is not dangerous. We are safe. You can use those like different techniques to come to, okay, we're going to take deep breaths. These are all things that I can tell myself. You get your amygdala to calm down, right? you turn off your little survival mechanism and say, okay, you're safe. But I'm like, my baby needs literally everything from me besides like breathing at this point. I have to change his diaper. I have to feed him. He can't move. Like, why do I expect him to have?
I expect these things. Well, and I was going to say, one thing that you had written was, in the United States, we have pathologized typical infant behavior. That much of the parenting advice is based on research with heavy limitations. So most of it relies on behavior modification of an infant or a child, instead of shifting focus on parental healing and typical infant development. There are these unreasonable societal expectations of children. And I think you're touching on that. I mean, can you name some more of these examples that you started to really find around early childhood behavior that is typical, that we've misunderstood about what we should expect of babies and infants?
I mean, I think I just, I mean, I think I kind of briefly touched upon some of these things, but, in terms of behavior, like, I think that a lot of us assume they are a lot more developed than they are. They don't have impulse control. I mean, as you know, it's upwards to age 25 before we truly like have integrated all of that into our brains can handle all of that.
We don't have a fully functioning prefrontal cortex until we're around 25 years old. You think about that. from a
It makes
scientific
sense,
perspective, the
right?
responsibilities that we
Right.
place on these young adults even.
Right.
Yes. And then here we're looking at
Exactly.
babies, expecting them to do
Right.
things that,
And
my
we
friend
also
can't do.
right. And that's the other thing, is like another reason why I'm like really into the whole adverse childhood experiences element. Not that I'm trying to
pick
make
your brain about that in a minute.
yeah, not that I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but, and I'm not here to say that like sleep training is an adverse childhood experience. It could be maybe for some babies,
Yes.
but I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, because of like adverse childhood experiences, things that we know is like, we have like stunted development, right? You can be stunted. It's not a rule, but it can stunt in our emotional kind of development, right? As well as so many other actual health outcome or social indicators in life. So it's just very interesting that, again, like fully grown adults can be walking around like even beyond 25 and you're not technically like even able to control your impulses because you weren't able to learn any skills in order to cope with that. So again, it's just like one of those things I find so silly. We expect babies to do it,
And tell us, tell us a little more about that idea of stunting. How is that happening during these early infancy stages? You were talking about co-regulating, but I don't think that's a common term for a lot of people. That's something
really
that therapists are starting to talk more
right,
about.
Right.
But what does that even mean for parents, and how do things like sleep training or some of the different types of parenting techniques that are trying to encourage independence, how does that impact that from your experience now and your research?
So I guess in its most basic sense, co-regulation would just be allowing, basically lending our nervous systems to our children because we are the mature brain. We have the mature, nervous system here, and you are able to model these behaviors, how to, be calm yourself, right? With your breathing, with our heart rate. This is on the most basic level with babies. They cry and, we meet a need. So that helps them understand they're safe in the world. They're understood, because you feed them, or you change them because they were uncomfortable, or maybe you like see that they had their clothes were a little too tight or itchy or something. You're meeting these needs, and it's showing like, okay, like you are not alone in the world. You are safe, you are heard, and we are going to get through it together. And I think even as adults, a lot of us like that, right? Or would ideally like that, even if some folks think that we need a little bit more space. Not that space is bad, but I think that a lot of it is like a learned behavior of, you weren't taught how to co-regulate with other human beings because you were, often left to deal with things on your own. And that can be really scary for, babies, because for a baby, again, they don't really have language, nothing. So they are, what we believe that they might, feel that they're not having their needs met. Right. And it's most basic, the most basic level here is, they have communication. They cry. That's the only way they can communicate. Obviously there's other like nonverbal cues, but that's how they're trying to let us know that they need something. And it's a caregiver's role to be able to step in and try to, help them feel at ease. So I guess that ended up being very, very long-winded. Do you have anything to add? Because I know that you're very much so an expert in that.
Well, I'm not. I'm learning too. I'm still growing in that area. But what you just saying that just made me think about the idea of adult cognitive dissonance, and this idea of people even being aware of the discomfort in themselves, or aware of their own problems, this blind spot they even have to how they're self-sabotaging in certain ways, or how they are contributing to their own problems, or how they're not seeking help, or how they even have a problem. I just had an interview with someone talking about the idea of shame and how many of us aren't even aware that we're living in this kind of deeply depressive shame state. All we know is we feel crappy and we don't want to live anymore. You know, that's where suicidality comes from, and some of this depression comes from, because you're not even aware of the shame and where it's come from. Because when it's so deeply rooted, I think about an infant not getting their needs met. How, I don't know if this happens, or maybe you can talk on this, but the idea that an infant saying, I'm uncomfortable in my diaper, you know, like all they know is pain and pleasure, right? To a certain degree. Like the experience is very simple, is I feel safe when I'm held. I know that I'm not alone, because they literally can't rely on themselves to protect themselves. So I know that I won't be eaten, you know, well, they're not thinking this, but there's the biological aspect of, I'm not going to be eaten by a wild animal when I'm with something that's strong and can hold me and protect me. I will get my needs met. I will be fed if I'm near this person, and I'm uncomfortable in my diaper. When I cry, they respond to me. So if I'm uncomfortable in my diaper and no one responds to me, there has to be a way of coping with that lack of responsiveness, which I can only imagine contributes to this idea of cognitive dissonance, that I can't trust my own feedback system. I can't trust that I am responding accurately to my own needs even. And so it hit me that it's not that I not only can't trust other people to respond to my needs, can I even read my own needs accurately? Which it's the first time that layer just got added.
I really love that you mentioned that, because that's something that I, you know, with other colleagues who do some of this work have talked about, because I think that this style of parenting, and especially nighttime nurturing or lack thereof, on a societal level, has been around for quite a while. I believe it's at least since the 50s. Spock, Dr. Spock, was really big on that, and there's a few other physicians who some were child either didn't raise their own children, or some of them even child free. Interesting that they're experts, you know, on that. But yeah, I think that sometimes we have to take a step back and think about, like, okay, what were the origins of this? Like, is it based on our, like, what we have ideals for in society, versus what is best for a family unit? And I like to emphasize that, because I often get fingers pointed at me that I don't care about parents, but I do. Trust me, I do care about parents. I care about everyone in the family unit, because that's everybody's well-being is crucial to you know, overall health for your lifetime. You know, within your own family.
The family and the extended family to have healthy children. So yes, it's
So, and I think it's really interesting, because if you look at our society and you look at, we have a huge burden of mental health crises. We have a lot of other issues systemically. When you think about healthcare, you think about education, you think about you know, some of the race and equity thing, you know, atrocities basically occurring. And, you know, as a society, like it's a way in which we've all been created to be, right? I mean, it's not like this is how human beings are, because if you look to other societies, other folks have different ways of being, right? And yet it's a uniquely American experience.
It's starting very early.
Yeah, it's of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You need to figure it out on your own. And how are these you know, uniquely American kind of ideals, and you know, you have to figure out on your own, like, you know, no handouts, whatever. You know, you have to rely on yourself. You should be self-sufficient, things like that. How is that trickling into our parenting? And it does. I think it really does, because we have to get back to work. We have, you know, we don't have, you know, we have nuclear families generally, where it's just, you know, two partners and like their immediate children that they have. It's not like you have any extra help right there all the time, you know, cooking and cleaning and caregiving alongside you, like humans for most of human history. Like humans have been around for a very long time. It's just in the past, like 100, 200 years maybe, that we've had this drastic shift. Like, so, and I'm trying to tie it back to something that you mentioned. When babies are born, they're born like they're not blank slates. They have a rich history from our human existence, and they're expecting, you know, to have their needs met by their caregivers, whoever those caregivers are. And because you're right, like they cry and they don't want to be crying because they could be in true danger, like, some animal could come get them. They don't know that it's not like that anymore. So they are still living, operating under that condition of like, it is danger if I'm alone. I require this, being in order to exist. And, that's besides the fact that, they actually truly need to be feeding all the time, which, we don't have any supports for in our society, which, leads people to do behaviorist techniques, because how the heck are we going to juggle it all, right?
You look at cultures that are still a little more collectivistic, and you look at these cultures where the babies are attached to their moms 24/7. They're wrapped. They're tied to them. And if it's not mom, they've got aunts and uncles and grandmas and generations of people who've been in that baby's life from the very beginning. So there are these surrogates, surrogate caregivers to help support that unit, because that baby, I mean, we're like one of the only species that's born so vulnerably in such a vulnerable state.
Right. I mean, that's a great thing to bring up in terms of, cognitive development, because in order for like a baby deer to get up and start running, like they have to have a lot more going on up there in order to have the functions to be able to, send the messages to their muscles to be able to make them move. So, that's just looking at things on the most basic level there. I mean, and even like something like a deer, again, they have different milk that they're fed. So they're given far more nutrient dense milk. That's why their parents can go, trot around and look for berries and forage for whatever they need. And the baby will sit there quietly in their little nest. And that's just a different species, right? But humans, we're not like that. We're supposed to be right there with them because we're born just little raisins.
They aren't walking for a year. They're not walking for a year.
Exactly.
Or longer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really incredible. And I feel like I went on a crazy tangent here, but it just really does speak to the unreasonable. It does. It speaks to the unreasonable expectations of our society. And, just because we mentioned there's collectivist cultures that exist to this day and, feed their babies every 2.5 minutes. I'm not I don't think anyone is saying like that is the way we need to be. We can be modern. We can, advance as societies, if you will. And why can't we do that alongside honoring families and being able to provide everyone with
that biology can shift, that the biological needs haven't shifted.
Right. Like why not lead with compassion and nurture for our society? It doesn't have to just be for families. I would love to see everybody taken care of. I deeply, deeply believe that the inequities that we are facing today are just completely wrong. It's not as if there are no ways that we can rectify these issues. It's just that there's a lot of political garbage keeping people from doing the right thing. And it's just sad. It's just really sad, because we should be able to have, mental health supports and be able to go to the hospital and not be bankrupt for the rest of our life, or deliver a baby and not
you're leading me to my next question. I mean, you're leading me to my next questions, because when we're talking about, okay, if we were to be very honest about what the neuroscience is saying about how vulnerable our babies really are, and how this idea of them being independent so early isn't really helpful. This idea of not being extremely responsive and nurturing to them early on. And when I say early on, not the first few months, for the first few years of their life. So when we really acknowledge what they're needing and what our society keeps pushing us to do for our young children under 2, under 3, around breastfeeding and around closeness and in responsiveness, the next conversation is just what you're saying is, okay, now how do we support the people who are supposed to provide that to them, which
Right.
is parents,
Right.
how
Right.
mothers first and foremost, and then the fathers, how did they contribute?
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole community around them, whether that be immediate family members or extended relatives, friends,
Mm-hmm.
the village, the healthcare system, the doctors, what has happened in our society to, and what are they really needing? How do we, what kind of support are these caregivers needing in order to
Whew.
provide that level of responsiveness that our babies really need?
So
What needs to
that is,
change there?
whew,
It's a
that's a
loaded
huge
question.
question. It is, but I think it's one that we
Yeah.
all need to sit down and really think about, because we can look to other societies who appear to have it more right than how we have it in the United States. You look at some of the like
Yeah, who is
countries like
doing
Sweden.
it
Yeah,
now? Yeah,
like
who's
over. I mean, basically every other uh,
many?
industrialized nation, I suppose. Right, has some sort of parental leave. Some have for both maternal and paternal leave. I know folks over in, like, I believe it's Sweden. They have like a couple years off, and then it's a slow
Wow.
integration back into the workplace. So they're just like part time for a little while, and then they get to go back to full time, and they don't see it as a negative impact. They understand the huge importance of child rearing and ensuring that children have like secure bases, secure attachments, and get all the support that they need, while ensuring that the family can exist, is getting paid to feed themselves, and even hell, go on vacation. Like, there are some countries that literally give vacation, like, as a country, give
Wow.
vacation like money. And
Yes.
and have um in their law, like, paid time off is required. Like, we don't have anything supporting or protecting um
So
people
you kind of
in this
the
nation. And I
country and organizations and the government are recognizing the value of kind of paying for it on the front end. I mean, I'm
right,
an employer,
right,
and so I understand how hard it is to pay for employees and how to then
right,
support employees during their time off and the coverage for them and the expenses of that. I'm not naive of the idea that, you know, the employees just want handouts and, coming for that.
yeah,
That from an employee standpoint, that's still a burden on the front end. But what you're saying
right.
is some of these countries are starting to recognize that the
Mm-hmm. Or
payout on
have.
the back end is longevity,
Right.
with employees being able to stay with them for much longer.
Mm-hmm.
That there are some benefits that they're
Right. And
recognizing.
there's just
And
like, more kind of well adjusted society, if you will. They're
okay,
raising kids who are going to be um, good contributions to the economy later. Whereas, there
yeah,
are a lot of issues. We have like, really vast amounts of like poverty, and it's hard
mental
to get
illness.
ahead when you're like, how we look at compensation in this country is, we like have hierarchy of roles, when it's like, why shouldn't someone who cleans toilets or whatever it is be paid a dignified wage? Like, why can't they have stable housing? Like, why can't they afford to feed themselves? Why can't they have healthcare? Like, we just have to like totally reconsider how we um, basically treat other human beings in this country. So that's like another whole layer. But then there are so many things.
Absolutely.
Having healthcare coverage would alleviate a huge burden. That's a huge um, stressor and financial stressor in the United States. Plus, because of things like adverse childhood experiences that lead to poor health outcomes, like, that
Yes.
increase substance use disorder, alcoholism,
Oh my
hypertension,
gosh.
depression, all sorts of things. It's not just adverse childhood experiences. There's also like environmental injustices and all of that. There's so many layers, but again, it goes back
Yes.
to this individualistic of society that, it's when a company opens up, they're just doing whatever they want because they want to make the money, and we don't have a ton of checks to keep making sure they're paying and treating their workers well. We don't have a ton of supports for the community in which they then like build into, right, or establish their business, and it could be wreaking havoc in a million different ways. So yeah, it's the fabric, I feel like, of our society. It can be quite
it's a little
rotten.
backwards. So it's like, you get what you pay for. So it's the idea that the structure of this individualistic mindset is actually something that we're paying for on the back end with extreme poverty, with mental illness that's hitting people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're no longer able to contribute or support themselves, which leads to homelessness, which leads to more people needing social services. More people having mental health issues and
more people just and just like presenting to the emergency department as opposed to like getting preventative care because they didn't have insurance or money to be able to do that, take care of themselves in the front end, because that's not how our society is. And then, they don't have insurance, they're not paying for it. Who's paying for it? It's the people who are still working. So, folks want to keep complaining about taxing folks for things like social programs. But it's not like the money just comes out of nowhere. It still comes out of your pocket if you're like the person that is, working. So why not pay on the front end to prevent these issues? And it will be far less money. And you get something out of it. Like a lot of times we don't get much out of it here,
Comes, yes. And it's, well, again, you're getting the cheap, crisis response at the end, as opposed to the really deeply rooted preventative stuff, which again, it's much easier to and I think we're talking about parenting 101, which is, if you develop the skills and manage the behaviors at the beginning, it's much easier to deal with a 2-year-old's tantrum than a 45-year-old's tantrum. I worked for years with a lot of those failure to launch kids that were now in their 40s, 50s, 60s, dealing with all this mental health stuff, a lot of behaviors that are not conducive with being contributing citizens. And now their parents are in their 80s, 90s, they're passing away. They're no longer able to bail their kids out and support their kids. And now their kids have no one. And this is where, yes, you're just naming the big problem. So the root of it, what I love is that you are able to speak a little bit on how some countries have caught this, realized this, and they're making this shift and realizing we've got to put a lot more attention, money, funding into families again, into how we raise our children. We've got to start doing things differently on the preventative side, and really start to understand who are these children are adults that we're raising. These early choices we make and these early things that we invest in are going to pay for themselves in 20, 30 years or damage us in 20, 30 years. 40 years, 50 years. So I think that's so big. Well, and you know what, kind of going back to, there are two things you talk about, which is the adverse child information. I want to ask you about that in a second. But before we get into that, which I think will help speak to the ACEs, you speak a lot about survivor bias and why people are still resistant to some of these ideas of shifting our focus and shifting our ideology away from some of these things that short-term, when we're struggling, we do want to, we do lean on or has been normalized in our society. Tell me a little bit about kind of what survivor bias is and how it kind of plays into this conversation.
So I've recently talked about survivorship bias here, or survivor bias, pretty much interchangeable. So that, and the definition for that is it's basically a cognitive error that we make when we're only considering like successful observations without considering those that didn't succeed. So a lot of times this actually, you see it in like business. So like you'll see, in an MBA program, they're like, oh, look at, Steve Jobs, how successful he was. When you don't see that he had failed a ton of times before, and you don't also see all the other people who tried to make phones before him, which is the majority who had failed, and you're just, raising that one thing to a pedestal.
Yeah.
Right. So I think So when I talk about this, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So one of the other things I'm passionate about in this whole parenting space, because I felt a little duped by the sleep training and how I felt like it is one of those things that is over hyped, I suppose, in terms of its, success and the necessity of it at all. As I am a public health professional, I, looked into things such as, I don't believe it's sleep training or bed sharing, but I do believe, I think there's things you can do, in between there. But I do believe that if you are having a lot of struggles because your child is extremely high needs, they're, really sensitive, which is the child that I had, we need to be teaching parents about how to more safely, I'm not saying it's safe, I'm saying more safely bed share, because quite frankly, it is extremely dangerous when we're falling asleep, like sitting on a couch or on like a rocking chair or something, trying to stay awake, because everything that we hear in the United States is abstinence only education on bed sharing. It's the worst thing that you could do, and you're going to kill your baby. So I started talking about survivorship bias because when you really look at the data, yes, there are some increased risks for your infant if you choose to bed share. And what a lot of times that we see in the United States is there is folks that kind of point fingers saying, oh, that's survivorship bias. If you do bed share it, it's successful, because you see that it can be risky. But something that we've noticed is if you look at other countries around the world, the UK, Australia, Canada, Spain, France, they all have policies on how to more safely bed share, because they understand human nature. And quite frankly, that's how humans have always slept with their babies. And if you go to other places like India, you go to any other
no
country
question.
that doesn't, they're like, what are you talking about? That's just sleeping. Them sleeping alongside their infant is just sleeping. Indigenous Americans.
That opened my eyes. People
right.
think we're crazy, actually, for even putting our children in cribs or in separate sleep surfaces. Because,
right. They're like, what are you doing?
I remember,
And that's something that has come up out of, again, if you look at society, some believe that it came out of germ theory, where they started separating people, because we always just sleep like all together in big rooms. Like families would all just sleep together in a room. And, the whole idea of, people spread germs. So they starting having people sleep separately. So that's kind of like where some of this stuff began. But going back to the whole survivorship
about like the industrial area as well, just the idea of having separate caregivers, or the idea of women having to go back into the workplace. And so this idea of women needing more sleep so that they could function during the day. So that meant we're putting the baby somewhere else. So that, there's so many different contributions to this ideology.
But it's all recent. It's very recent.
It's in the last 100 years, 200 years.
Right. So my mentioning of the survivorship bias is the fact that a lot of folks, especially in medicine in the United States, will say, we shouldn't be teaching people that because it's survivorship bias when bed sharing works out. However, a lot of the data are quite flawed, and they even lump things really, I feel like, intentionally bad in the United States to make it look worse than it is, because they'll call all same surface fatalities like loss due to bed sharing. So that would be like you're sleeping on a water bed, or again, you're sleeping on the couch or like a chair, or something that we know is
missing
like
nuance.
that is very, very dangerous. Tons of pillows, tons of blankets. Like we're not saying that. That's not what I'm advocating for. So how can we discredit the way in which humans have slept forever and like chalk it up to survivorship bias? I think that there's risks associated with a lot of things that we do. And another thing that I find interesting is sometimes we do, because in the United States we have very poor data on like bed sharing and unfortunately infant loss. And often if there was a bed sharing scenario, it won't be like qualified as SIDS at all. It would be a sudden unexpected infant death, which one of the things I hope to see more of in the future is more research in that field, because I wonder, again, if your kid is a little bit more high needs or what have you, they could maybe have something medically wrong that is why they're seeking the closeness, and could be why they may have incidentally passed away while being in the bed. But that's something, again,
There's so
we
many
need more data on.
factors
These are just
that
my
we need to.
speculations. Yeah,
So
these are
what
just
you're
my
saying is a
speculations, but
lot of these SIDS related or the sudden infant deaths that are being reported, they all get clumped into being related to bed sharing, where often there are other factors. It wasn't the bed sharing in and of itself that was necessarily the problem. It could have been all these other factors, the wrong types of sleep services, a lot of things that aren't educated, or it could be, illness, different factors that relate to the child's wellness and health.
yeah.
Um,
And again, like I'm not like pro everybody should be bed sharing. I am just pro everybody should be educated on it, because you never know when you're going to be absolutely exhausted and having to tend to your baby at night. So highly recommend, if you are here listening, you can check out, there's loads of free resources. You can find like the United Kingdom, there's Basis online, there's Lullaby Trust in Canada, health.gov, like literally you can just find it there. We have a couple of resources here, but UNICEF is also another place where you can find really reliable resources on that type of topic without me having to go too much further on that.
Yeah, so it is. It's just this idea of, when people have certain experiences, even with, crib, training and sleep training and some of these experiences, it's that idea of, well, I survived. And I get this all the time,
Right.
I was spanked and I was fine.
I survived,
and it's like,
right.
well, are you?
I know, right.
I'd like to see that psych assessment.
And that's another.
How much money do you make? What kind of relationships do you have with your family members?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated. So it's important to acknowledge that people's personal experiences and having made it through doesn't necessarily reflect the overall societal impact and the overall long-term impact on children. And frankly, the problem is we don't always have enough information on that, because we're not asking those questions. We're not even looking into it. And it's really important for us to have some discernment with regards to that, instead of just assuming, okay, because this worked for a family. Again, I think I talked to you before we started on this, the idea that even personality disorders, a lot of people don't get diagnosed. And, we're not really seeing the breakdown of these disorders always impacting people until later in life. They're able to survive in their 20s, their teens and their 20s. They've got the support system of other people. Their parents are able to bail them out of jail. They're, they've got drinking too much, and partying is socially acceptable in college. Like, there are a lot of behaviors. Spending too much, they can, again, get bailed out by different family members and friends. And so a lot of these inappropriate behaviors that manifested and started at a very early age also don't really, come to a head until they're in their 30s and their 40s. And then at that point, as a society, we just label them as broken. And they're an exception to the rule. Something happened. We don't know what happened to that person. And if we trace some of those things back, there was something that happened to them. They weren't born that way.
Right.
And so acknowledging that we've got to really start looking at the root of the problem and start acknowledging that some of these early years are really important. And that leads me to what you were beginning to talk about with regards to ACEs and how that applies to early child. Can you explain to us what ACEs are?
Absolutely. So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And these are potentially traumatic experiences that occur before our 18th birthday. There's 3 main types of ACEs. So they're abuse, that could be physical, emotional, or sexual, neglect, physical or emotional. And then there's household dysfunction is the last category, which is mental illness, incarceration, substance use, divorce, and witnessing violence. in the home. So that is like a kind of like
witnessing.
another part. Yeah. Just witnessing abuse.
Yeah.
So that is something I'm really passionate about because I've had the misfortune of having a quite high ACE score, and it has impacted everything in my life, right? To the extent we probably won't know until the end of my lifetime, right? Because there are a lot of data that show it's something like, so there's 2 out of 3 Americans have at least one adverse childhood experience, but each adverse childhood experience that you have has the potential to like kind of multiply the adverse effects that it can have on your lifetime health. And this could be physical health. So as some of the things that I had mentioned earlier, mental health, social health. So that would be, all of your interpersonal relationships. That also bleeds into finances and your economic stability, because again, if you're having all of these other challenges, it's hard to keep a job. It can be, or it can cause issues with employment. It can also lead you to fall back into the cycle of all of these things I just mentioned. You could end up perpetuating these experiences because that is all you knew, and it's not your fault. And I'm really passionate about it. Doesn't have to be a determinant. So one of the things I really worked on, very much so, was social determinants of health. But I like social drivers of health a little bit better because I don't like the idea that like they define you in terms of like, okay, so you're destined to this, like, because you have an ACE score of 8, you are determined, it's definitive that you are going to have this, outcome, right? There are many different ways that we can alleviate and lessen the impact of ACEs. Again, going back to like, if we freaking care about people in society and alleviate like financial stressors, increase access to different supports, we will start to reduce the number of people who are perpetuating the cycles of abuse, and perpetuating adverse childhood experiences, which then makes a healthier society. There will be fewer instances of substance use, incarceration, neglect, abuse, like all of these things that really follow you throughout a lifetime. It just
you kind of stop the problem in its tracks with I'm constantly talking about generational trauma. And I was thinking, even just from I call it an interrupt when I'm talking to clients about an interrupt it when they're having a moment, for example, that is a repetitive thing from their past. But you're talking about like even from a more global perspective, from a societal perspective, we can create these interrupts that actually prevent that problem from continuing on to the next generation by bringing awareness to it and creating these ways of compensating and supporting individuals who may have had this experience. If it would take 6 life, if their trajectory would be to have 20 years taken off their life, there might be things that could come in and interrupt that dysfunction in a way.
Right.
That's fascinating.
Absolutely. So if you, anyone who's listening who is interested, you can go to CDC, look at violence prevention, ACEs. They have a whole ton of information on there if you're just curious about the kind of academic side of things. However, if you're a person who you feel like you've had some of these adverse childhood experiences yourself, there's a site called numberstory.org that is incredible. It's a very easy to follow and very compassionately built site that helps you become aware of and figure out maybe how to start grappling with finding out, because I feel like some people don't really realize that they've had adverse childhood experiences. And when you do find out, it can be really jarring and it can be really emotional. It can be kind of send you back into like a really challenging place. So I just want you to know, like, if you start going through this stuff, like, having some support would be great. Like, ensuring you have maybe like a support person available, whether it be a spouse or a really good friend, or, someone who is close in your life. And then, again, if you have like the financial means to be able to seek out professional support, I always advocate for that because that is amazing. I just know that some people don't either have the money, or sometimes there's a lot of stigma, so they might need to work through things before they decide to hop in. But I really love that site, and I cannot speak even, I can't sing my graces about that site anymore that I am right now, because it's just it's just a really amazing resource that I think that everyone should check out, because again, as much as I truly deeply believe in all of these societally led changes, I also worked in community health improvement, and one of the things I would teach is culture eats policy for lunch, which is a quote from some sort of
interesting. I love
forget
that.
if it's a business book or something. I can't remember exactly who I quote, but we need to change ourselves. There is a level of personal responsibility in all of this stuff, in all of this work, whether it be, I hate saying self-healing, but I feel like that's the word or kind of language that lands with people, because there is like a little bit of, you need to reflect, self-reflection, try to have some, figure out some coping mechanisms. If you can't figure it out yourself, like, please get help. You need to rely on other people. Like, that's another huge thing. You need to rely on other people, and you need to also understand that you are not your adverse, experiences. You are not that. You are more than that, and you can move through that, and they can be empowering part of your story. And then when we all have this collective humanity and can sit with and reflect on some of these issues and challenges that we faced, imagine the things that we would be open to legislating. You know what I mean? So that's where it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of situation. That's why I talk about it all.
Yes, because it all matters, we can think about things from a global standpoint, but also from an individual standpoint. And there is that, even, here you are an epidemiologist, but what is it? The patient zero, there's always that patient zero also. And that trickle down effect, even from from the aspect of psychological issues and social issues, there's a patient zero for that. And if we can treat that patient zero, then the trickle down effect is null and void, that we're able to stop that problem from disseminating into the entire population. And so kind of recognizing that, from that's individualistic kind of that one person place, but also that collectivistic view of the greater impact when we again maintain humanity and value everyone's humanity. And so, oh my gosh, well, I could go for another hour
I could too.
but I know neither of us have that kind of time as working moms. But Candace, thank you so much. This has been such a rich conversation. I know it's just the beginning of many, and I just hope you continue doing the work that you do. Thank you for being on this show. And for any of you who want to follow Candace on Instagram, you can find her at CandaceSt.John.mph. Reach out to her through her website, CandaceSt.John.com. And you also have a blog with more details around early childhood questions that anyone in our audience might have. And what I love, you can dig this up too from your website. You literally created a Google spreadsheet with a list of evidence-based. I was like, this is my woman. Speak of my language. Put it on a spreadsheet. Some of the sources regarding the points that you've made in this episode. So that our audience doesn't have to do the digging themselves. You've done the research, you've read through this stuff, you've listed it out and said, hey, read it yourself, do your own critical thinking. So it's not just anecdotal opinions that you're spouting out. You've really researched this quite a bit. And personally, guys, if you are getting information from even doctors and therapists who are not citing their sources, it's okay to question them. Take it with a grain of salt. That includes me. And again, even research is flawed. And so it's important to constantly question even the research. Specialists make mistakes. We get lazy, we get lax, we get told stories that seem so credible, and we begin to disseminate this information that isn't really backed up by the the research. And so do your own work. And you also offer one-on-one consultations to specialists out there. You're constantly working in the communities to provide more public health information. I'm just so grateful for that. So thank you, Candace, for speaking to us today.
So much. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was great chatting with you, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Yes, I hope so too. We'll have to do a follow-up on this. So for you guys, I'm Lindsay Burke again. You can follow me at Lift Therapy. Thank you all for listening and connecting with us, and we will be in touch.
I hope that episode was helpful. Hey, listen, if you want to share your singlehood journey, if you've gone somewhere and come back, if you have revelations and wisdom, please share your story. It's going to help other people. Nothing makes us feel more connected than hearing other people's stories. So just send me the audio of your story, and you can just record it directly from your phone and email it to theangrytherapist@gmail.com. Also, if you want our Single on Purpose newsletter, go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life. You will get tools and articles and other people's stories, and also Zoom links to private gathers. So if you want to join our community, go to singleonpurpose.life. Thank you for listening. Be well. We hope you tell a friend. Hey, before you go, I want to invite you to the Single on Purpose private community online. It's off of social media. No ads, no algorithms. We got forums, we got live groups, we got webinars, and we have social hangs. We also have offline in-person hangs happening soon. So check us out. Go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life. And I will see you inside.